One must begin with the obvious, though it seems to escape the notice of approximately half the American electorate. When a man spends decades cultivating the friendship of a serial pedophile, boasting of their shared taste in young women, and then suddenly develops amnesia about the relationship once the crimes become undeniable, we are not dealing with mere political expedients, but with something altogether more sinister. The Epstein files, those documents whose very mention causes certain powerful men to reach for their lawyers and their blood pressure medication, remain largely sealed, not by accident, but by design. And who stands most prominently among those who benefit from this concealment? Donald Trump, that orange monument to American decline, whose administration saw Jeffrey Epstein die under the most suspicious circumstances imaginable while in federal custody, and whose political movement now deploys threats and intimidation against anyone who dares suggest the files should see daylight. Let us dispense with the polite fiction that Trump barely knew Epstein. The photographic evidence alone, those leering images from Mar-a-Lago parties, the shared flights, the mutual attendance at social gatherings spanning decades, tells a story of intimate friendship. Trump himself, in his characteristic inability to keep his mouth shut when bragging was involved, told New York Magazine in 2002 that Epstein was a terrific guy who enjoyed women on the younger side. This is what passes for subtle innuendo in Trump's vocabulary, a vocabulary that rarely extends beyond the monosyllabic, except when discussing either his own imagined victories or his enemies' invented defeats. The MAGA movement's response to calls for transparency has been predictably thuggish. When journalists or activists suggest that perhaps the American people deserve to know which of their leaders participated in or knew about Epstein's crimes, they are met not with reasoned argument, but with death threats, doxing, and the kind of coordinated harassment that would make any authoritarian regime proud. This is not politics. It is organized intimidation, the last refuge of those who know that the truth would destroy them. Consider the timeline. Epstein is arrested in July 2019 during Trump's presidency. He dies in federal custody a month later under circumstances that beggar belief. Cameras malfunction, guards fall asleep, standard protocols are mysteriously abandoned. The Attorney General, William Barr, whose father had given Epstein his first job teaching at a prestigious private school despite his lack of qualifications, oversees the investigation and quickly declares there's nothing to see here. The files remain sealed, the questions remain unanswered, and Trump, who once couldn't stop talking about his good friend Jeffrey, suddenly can't remember ever really knowing the man. This is the behavior not of an innocent man, but of someone desperate to keep certain doors locked and certain stories untold. When Trump speaks of the deep state, he is engaging in that time-honored tradition of the guilty, accusing others of precisely what he himself embodies. For what is more deep state than using the apparatus of government to cover up crimes, to protect the powerful from accountability, and to ensure that justice remains a commodity available only to those who can afford it or threaten their way out of it? The Republican Party's transformation into Trump's personal protection racket represents one of the most spectacular acts of institutional cowardice in American political history. Here is a party that once claimed to stand for law and order, for the protection of children, for moral values, reduced to running interference for a man whose entire career has been a monument to the violation of every principle they claim to hold dear. They know what's in those files, or at least they can guess. They know why Trump is so desperate to keep them sealed, and yet they choose power over principle, access over accountability, the coward's bargain over the citizen's duty. The intimidation tactics employed by MAGA adherents deserve special attention, for they represent something new and particularly poisonous in American political discourse. When those who call for the release of the Epstein files receive death threats, when their children are threatened, when their addresses are published online with explicit calls for violence, we are witnessing the importation of fascist methodology into mainstream American politics. This is not hyperbole, it is simply an accurate description of what happens when people dare to suggest that powerful men should be held accountable for their associations with child rapists. Trump's own history with young women, the pageant dressing rooms he boasted of entering, the multiple allegations of sexual assault, The recorded admissions of grabbing women by the pussy forms a pattern that makes his friendship with Epstein seem less like an unfortunate association and more like a meeting of kindred spirits. When he wished Ghislaine Maxwell well after her arrest, he was not merely being polite, he was sending a message, the same message sent by the suspicious death of Epstein himself. Keep quiet or else. The mechanism of cover-up operates through a combination of direct suppression and manufactured distraction. Every time the question of the Epstein files surfaces, Trump and his movement respond with a fresh outrage, a new enemy to denounce, another conspiracy theory to muddy the waters, Hunter Biden's laptop, Hillary's emails, the stolen election. Each serves as a shiny object to distract from the fundamental question, what are they so afraid of revealing? The answer, one suspects, is that the files would reveal not just individual crimes but an entire ecosystem of corruption, a network of powerful men who knew about, enabled or participated in Epstein's crimes. Trump, as the most powerful among them, has the most to lose. His entire political persona, the outsider, the drain-the-swamp crusader, the protector of forgotten Americans, would be revealed as the grotesque facade it always was. The failure to release these files represents more than just a cover-up. It represents a fundamental betrayal of the social contract. In a democracy, the people have a right to know when their leaders are criminals. They have a right to know when those who make laws have broken them in the most heinous ways imaginable. The continued suppression of this information, maintained through threat and intimidation, is an admission that we no longer live in a functioning democracy, but in something closer to an oligarchy where the powerful protect each other from the consequences of their crimes. What makes Trump particularly contemptible in this saga is not just his probable complicity, but his cynical exploitation of the very real problem of child trafficking for political gain. He and his movement claim to be fighting pedophiles, while simultaneously ensuring that the most comprehensive documentation of elite pedophilia remains hidden from public view. They scream about groomers while protecting the friend of the most notorious groomer in modern American history. This is not mere hypocrisy, it is an active participation in the very evil they claim to oppose. The media's failure to pursue this story with appropriate vigor represents its own form of cowardice, cowed by threats of lawsuits, intimidated by online mobs, or simply exhausted by the sheer volume of Trump's other offenses. They have allowed this fundamental question to slip into the background. Every journalist who accepts Trump's "I hardly knew him" lie without challenge, every editor who decides the story is too dangerous to pursue becomes complicit in the cover-up. The Republican Party's acquiescence to this suppression reveals the hollow core at the heart of modern conservatism. These are people who would rather protect a probable pedophile enabler than protect children. They would rather maintain power than maintain principles. They have calculated that their voters either don't care about Trump's connection to Epstein or can be distracted from caring about it, and thus far, that calculation has proven correct. This is where the intimidation becomes essential to the project. By making it dangerous to ask questions, by ensuring that those who demand answers face real consequences, the MAGA movement has created a climate of fear that would be familiar to anyone who has lived under authoritarianism. The message is clear: pursue this story and we will destroy you. The fact that this message is being sent in America in the 21st century by supporters of a former and current president should chill anyone who still believes in democratic values. The tragedy is not just that Trump will likely never face accountability for his relationship with Epstein, but that an entire political movement has been mobilized to ensure he never has to. Every MAGA supporter who issues threats, every Republican politician who remains silent, every conservative media figure who changes the subject, all are participating in what may be the most consequential cover-up in American political history. What those files would reveal, we can only guess, but the desperation to keep them hidden, the willingness to deploy violence and intimidation to maintain their secrecy, tells us everything we need to know. Trump and his movement are not defending principle. They are defending the indefensible. They are not protecting America, they are protecting themselves. And in doing so, they reveal the fundamental truth about Trumpism. It was never about making America great, but about making the guilty unaccountable. The Republic deserves better than this sordid capitulation to thuggery. It deserves leaders who face accountability rather than flee from it. It deserves citizens who demand truth rather than settle for comfortable lies. Most of all, it deserves to know what its leaders have done, especially when what they have done involves the exploitation of children. That this basic demand for transparency is met with threats and intimidation tells us that we are no longer dealing with a political movement but with something far darker, a criminal enterprise dressed in the flag and carrying a cross, as the saying goes. Until those files are released, until the full truth of the Trump-Epstein relationship is known, every American institution that claims to stand for justice stands instead for its opposite. The intimidation will continue because it works, the cover-up will persist because we allow it, and Trump will remain what he has always been, a man whose entire life has been devoted to the principle that rules are for other people, that accountability is for the weak, and that power means never having to say you're sorry or even admit what you've done. The Epstein files are not just documents, they are a test of whether America still believes in the principle that no one is above the law. Thus far, we are failing that test spectacularly, and Trump, with his characteristic combination of brazenness and cowardice, is the principal reason why.